Hey guys, this is Eric's What If, and welcome to part 7 of What If Yuji was like All For One. Continuing where we left off, unbeknownst to Yuji, he was generating fear, the exact thing he wanted, so people could generate more cursed energy. His plan was working, albeit slow, it was still working in general. After Tengen's defeat, Yuji would officially begin the culling games, awakening every single sorcerer that Kenjaku had placed a mark upon within the 10 colonies. Yuji's plan for the culling game was simple. He was going to go to each and every colony and absorb as many curse techniques as he possibly could. And then when he had his fill, he was going to continue Kenjaku's plan. He would attempt to talk to the Japanese government and show them about cursed energy and how it works and how they could use it as a renewable resource, hoping they would buy into the plan so that he could use non-sorcerers in order to generate even more cursed energy. His plan was solid, and he knew that no one could stop him at the moment. For right now, he was simply going to take it easy. He had enough fighting. He simply wanted to have fun now. There was no one who could stop him now, not even Sukuna himself. Gojo was sealed. A majority of the sorcerers were dead. When everything was said and done, he was going to go back to Jujutsu High and destroy everything there anyway. Either that, or make it his base of operations. Ruling the world with fear, ruling the world with an iron fist. Yuji couldn't wait, smiling ear to ear. Just then, we would cut over to the Jujutsu sorcerers. It would be Yuta, Hikari, Maki, and Nanami. They would all be discussing a plan on how they were going to take down Yuji and or free Satoru Gojo. All of them knew things were grim, however, they needed to free Satoru Gojo as he was their only hope. They knew that Tengen was dead, seeing as majority of the barriers around Jujutsu High were down, and they had to come up with some kind of plan. They didn't know exactly how they were going to free Satoru Gojo, but they would have to come up with something. They were only able to talk to Tengen briefly, before Yuji had found his way inside of the Jujutsu High barriers. Tengen would tell them about Yuji's plan and what he wanted to do, or how he was enacting Kenjaku's plan. She would explain the basics to them, but that was all she was able to do. Things were looking extremely grim. Maki had gone to the Zenin clan, attempting to use Megami's name as head in order to take weapons out of their inventory. However, coming back, there was a different heir to her altogether. Yuta would tell the group that they have to find a way to free Satoru Gojo within the culling games. With all the people that had awakened the technique, or the incarnated sorcerers themselves, there was at least one person in there who could possibly unseal Satoru Gojo or had a technique that was able to do so. They would simply have to get lucky and attempt to find that person. They had no idea where Megami was either. They didn't know if he was dead or simply out of commission somewhere. They had to focus their sights on that as well. They would attempt to find Megami, find someone who could free Satoru Gojo, and rack up points in order to change rules and attempt to save as many people as they could in the culling games. All the non-sorcerers in there were simply playthings to the sorcerers that were in there. Yuta would tell the group that they should more than likely split up. It wasn't the smartest idea, however. If they split up, they would be able to find more ground. Yuji could be in one of the colonies, so he would tell them to simply be careful, and if they were to encounter Yuji, don't engage with him, simply run away. Yuji was too strong for anybody but Yuta at the moment. He would tell them to simply be careful, and that he would try to gain as many points as he could, as well as trying to conversate with other curse users to see if they would transfer their points, to try to make as many rules as they could, in order to halt or at least stop the culling games in some way. The entire group would nod, as the plan was in motion. Plan A was to attempt to find anybody with a whole bunch of points, to see if they would help them out in their plan in order to stop the culling games. They would also be attempting to find someone who could unseal Satoru Gojo within all of the colonies. Out of the 10 colonies that were there had to be at least one person that was able to unseal him, while also looking for Megami. Their plan was sound, and they intended on doing exactly what they told each other they were going to do. They would separate, each going into different colonies. If they saw Yuji, they were simply going to lay low or retreat. Unless they were together, they were not going to try to fight Yuji at all, especially now that he's probably had some rest and is back at full strength. Their main goal was to unseal Satoru Gojo and find Megami. The group would tell everybody their goodbyes and tell each other good luck. The sorcerers that would be entering the culling games would be Yuta, Maki, Hikari, and Nanami, with each of them entering different colonies. We would cut back over to where Yuji was. He would be in Tokyo Colony number 1, as he would have already racked up around 150 points. Most of the people that he would come across were weak, and the techniques that they had were simply boring, not worth his time and not worth absorbing. Majority of the sorcerers he was able to defeat by simply summoning Agito and watching them fight his Shikigami. There were only a couple of sorcerers that were able to push Agito back, and Yuji would attempt to have their fun with them. However, they would die almost immediately fighting Yuji. Just then, Kogane would pop up near Yuji, saying that a player has added a new rule, allowing them to see the points of other players. Yuji would raise an eyebrow at this and begin to smile. He would think whoever this player was a genius, being able to see other people's points, so he could see whoever was strong. He would then look at the list, seeing as there was a player named Hiromi Higuruma. The player had at least 100 points, and Yuji would begin to smile. He had finally found a strong person, someone with 100 points. This was well worth his time. He would go around the colony beating other people up, asking them where Higuruma was. As he would finally get his answer, he would head towards the theater, where Higuruma would have his base of operations at. As he would enter, he would see Higuruma in a bathtub. Yuji would smile and laugh and say that he's been looking for Higuruma, and ask if he was him. Higuruma would look over and ask Yuji, why does he care? Yuji would tell Higuruma that he wants him to give him his points. He has some things that he needs to set in motion, and with Higuruma's points, he would be able to do so. Higuruma would simply turn his head back over the other way and say no. Higuruma would then tell Yuji that he's nothing but a criminal. Higuruma would say that he's heard about Yuji, and that he knows that he's the one who started these games. Higuruma would say that the games themselves, they aren't bad at all. He's able to do justice properly and kill those who are truly evil. However, the way Yuji has gone about it is just unjust, and it goes against everything. Yuji would take a deep breath and ask Higuruma, is that all he has to say? It doesn't matter if Higuruma doesn't want to give him his points. Yuji could earn the points some other way anyway. He would kill everybody in this colony. It didn't matter to Yuji. Either way, he was getting his 100 points. Higuruma would then stand up, getting out of the bathtub. He would ask Yuji if that was so, as a hammer would begin to appear in Higuruma's hand. Yuji would begin to smirk, saying that it is. Higuruma would then tell Yuji that then he is truly evil and that he needs to be stopped right here. He would tell Yuji that he may not be the most upright person because of the things that he's done. However, Yuji is objectively worse than him, way worse. Yuji would smile and say that he knows, as Higuruma would immediately say the words domain expansion, deadly sentencing. Yuji would be surprised, as he knew this guy wasn't a sorcerer of the past. However, in just this short amount of time, he was able to expand a domain. Yuji was even happier, seeing as there was somebody this strong. Yuji would sit there simply scanning the area, trying to figure out how the domain worked, as Higuruma would then begin to explain it to him. After said explanation, Yuji would then begin to be put on trial. Judgment would then tell Yuji that he's under suspicion for the murder of Nobara Kugisaki. As Yuji would simply smile and say yes, he killed her. Higuruma would give Yuji a disgusted look, seeing as he was able to admit that so openly. Judgment would then scream out to Yuji, guilty, death penalty, confiscation, as the domain would then subside. Yuji could feel it. Higuruma wasn't exactly aware of Yuji's technique, but Yuji could tell. Only one of his techniques got stripped away due to confiscation. Yuji would simply smile and say that it was such a shame. His technique seemingly counters majority of people. Higuruma's domain would have stripped Yuji of Star Rage. However, Higuruma was granted the Executioner's Sword. Higuruma wouldn't say anything about the Executioner's Sword, but Yuji could only take a guess. He probably shouldn't allow himself to get hit by that sword, seeing as the judgment said death penalty. Yuji had probably met specific conditions in order for that to happen. Yuji's brain being a lot more analytical due to him having an abundance of techniques. He would have to think around, understanding the situation he was in. Higuruma would rush forward, attempting to finish the fight as quickly as he could. He would stab at Yuji, however, Yuji would simply dodge to the side. He would play along with Higuruma for now, but eventually, he was going to end this. Having his fun, he would act as if he couldn't use any type of curse technique, simply dodging, as Higuruma would continue his assault, slashing and stabbing over and over. However, Yuji would simply dodge the attacks, being too fast for Higuruma. Higuruma may have been a genius, but Yuji was simply faster and stronger than him. He would continue his assault on Yuji, as he would use an overhead swing on Yuji. Yuji would dodge out of the way, finally pressing the attack. He would punch Higuruma in the face, sending him flying, as Higuruma would be stunned. Yuji seemingly didn't even use a lot of cursed energy there. However, he was pushed back that far away. Yuji was an entirely different beast, and this was just with cursed energy alone. There was no technique behind it. Higuruma knew that he had to hurry up and get this together. He needed to finish Yuji right now, otherwise he would die, and he knew that. But in Higuruma's head, he knew that if he was to die here, it would simply be his karma for killing the people that he killed already. Shaking his head, Higuruma would rush in once more. But to his surprise, Yuji would be behind him already. Caught off guard, he would be confused, as Yuji would have used projection sorcery. Just then, Higuruma would have turned into a frame himself, as Yuji would then use auto transfiguration, transforming his hand into a more compact version. On top of using blood manipulation, using flowing red scale stack, he would strike Higuruma, crashing the panel, slamming him into the wall. Off this one attack alone, Higuruma was coughing up blood. This had also broke 2 of Higuruma's ribs. However, Higuruma would be confused. He thought he took Yuji's technique. What exactly was this, and what was going on? He was sure Judgment said confiscation, and Yuji wasn't able to use it. However, it would seem Yuji was toying with him this entire time. He couldn't believe it. Yuji would then smile as he would point his finger towards Higuruma, saying the words boom, as Higuruma would let off a soft smile and say that this is just simply his karma, as he would then explode, taking even more damage, blasting him back into the wall once more. Just these 3 attacks alone would cause Higuruma to be knocked unconscious. Knowing Higuruma probably wasn't going to give his points to Yuji, Yuji would stand over Higuruma's body. He would then use his reverse gravity technique on Higuruma, beginning to crush his body. Using RCT on Higuruma just a tiny bit in order to wake him up. He would tell Higuruma to wake up. Beginning to put more pressure on his body, he would tell Higuruma that right now he could transfer his points and live, or he could keep his points and die. The choice was up to him. Higuruma would tell Yuji that he doesn't know what he has planned. However, Higuruma would tell Yuji that he would rather die than assist him in whatever plans that he had going on. It would simply be his karma. Yuji would say whatever, and so be it. He's still going to gain the points, no matter what Higuruma does. He was going to kill everybody in this colony and then move on to the next. It didn't matter to Yuji. All of this was simply a game to him. Higuruma would call Yuji sick and say that somebody will stop him eventually. Yuji would laugh and say he's heard that before, as he would make the reversal gravity even stronger, beginning to crush Higuruma slowly. Yuji would simply turn away and begin to walk away, as he didn't care about Higuruma's technique. It wasn't something that was effective for Yuji. The only thing that he'd be able to make useful out of Higuruma's technique was his curse tool. Other than that, it was pointless to him. Higuruma would begin to get crushed slowly and agonizingly, as his life would then finally come to an end. Yuji would be granted the 5 points and begin to make his way out of the theater. And he would then tell Kagane to add a rule. He would tell Kagane to add the ability to move freely between the colony borders, so he could make his progress towards different colonies. Setting it in play, as everybody would adhere this rule, majority of the sorcerers would begin to be frightened. Even if you were ruling number 1 in your colony, if someone who was stronger from another colony was to simply join in and kill you, what were you going to do? Yuji would then make his way to Tokyo colony number 2. He'd look at the list of players, as just then he'd see another player with over 100 points named Hajime Kashimo. He would begin to smile at the sight of another strong player. He wasn't expecting one so early like this. He would just hope that they had a better technique than the last person he fought. Feeling the cursed energy of 2 fighters nearby, he would sprint over, as he would see a guy with blonde hair and a guy with blue hair fighting. Yuji would jump down off the building he was on, landing in between both of them. He would smile menacingly, saying that he didn't mean to interrupt both of them. However, He would ask if either one of them was Kashimo. Hikari would look on in confusion at Yuji, realizing exactly who he was. He remembered what Yuta had told him, that if he was to encounter Yuji, he would need to run. Do not engage with him at all. They would only fight Yuji when they were together. Kissing his lips, Hikari would then begin to back up, as Yuji would say, "Not so fast." He would appear behind Hikari, using projection sorcery, putting his hand on his shoulder. He would tell Hikari that he was going to fight because he wanted to see his curse technique. Hikari would begin to sweat as he didn't realize Yuji was this fast, and just feeling the cursed energy off of Yuji, he could tell Yuji was way stronger than Yuta, and that's why Yuta told him that they should wait until they were together to fight Yuji. Kashimo would laugh and say that he can't believe there was someone this bold that would come in his colony and believe that they were going to run things right now. Kashimo would tell Yuji that he was in the middle of a fight, so if he could sit to the side and wait it out, then he would get to him shortly. Yuji would say no, that he wasn't going to sit around and wait, and that all three of them could fight each other. He would tell Kashimo, wouldn't that make it so much more fun? Kashimo would laugh again and say that he really loves the way Yuji thinks. However, Yuji would then say that the last guy he fought, he didn't have a lot of fun with him, so he was going to test the both of them. He wasn't going to fight immediately, however, he was going to summon one of his strongest Shikigami and see what either of them could do. Kashimo would laugh and call Yuji a coward. However, Yuji would say that no, he wasn't a coward. He could kill either of them if he really wanted to. However, right now, he simply wants to have fun. Smiling at Kashimo, he would then make hand signs to summon Maharaga, summoning him. Maharaga would stand tall with the wheel above his head, as both Hikari and Kashimo would be shocked. They didn't know what this thing was, but the presence that it had was absolutely alarming. Kashimo would begin to smile. He didn't know Yuji was this strong. However, if this was just one of the Shikigami he could summon, what could Yuji himself do? This was all the more exciting. Although he only wanted to fight Sukuna, Yuji might just be worth his time as well. Yuji would tell the two that he was going to sit over there, pointing towards some boxes, and that he was going to watch the three of them fight to the death, and whoever came out on top, he would fight after. However, Yuji was simply doing this to simply see whose technique he wanted to take. It wasn't a matter of who was stronger. He knew that if he really wanted to, he would simply use his gravity technique, pinning them to the ground, and if they were strong enough to resist that, he could simply use Star Rage, imbuing it within his gravity technique to make it even stronger. Yuji would smile and say that he was going to count down from 3, and that when he gets to 1, he wants them to fight with their heart's content. He would begin counting down. 3, 2, 1. As he would clap his hands, Maharaga would rush forward immediately. As Kashimo would rush forward as well. Hikari would be reluctant, but he knew he had no choice but to fight here. Starting off strong, Hikari would immediately pop a domain expansion, helping to get jackpot, so he could last even a little bit longer. Fighting Kashimo, Hikari was still on the back end of the fight. However, using his domains, he was able to keep up, but now that there was another person in the mix, he wasn't sure if he could keep up or not. However, he wasn't going to let that stop him. Inside of the domain, Maharaga's wheel would immediately spin. However, Kashimo would make the first move, rushing towards Maharaga, sending a punch straight towards his face. Maharaga would once again take the brunt of the attack, brushing it off, sending a punch straight towards Kashimo. Kashimo would block the attack, however, the weight behind it would be more than he expected, as it would push him back. Hikari would simply play it safe, waiting on his domain, but Maharaga would not allow that. He would rush towards Hikari, as Hikari would get into a defensive mode, ready for an attack. Maharaga would send a punch towards Hikari, as it would slam into his head, but Hikari would be able to block it simply just in time. However, it would crash him into the walls of the domain. As Maharaga would attempt to follow up on the attack, he would rush straight towards Hikari, throwing a right. Hikari would duck underneath it, attempting to sweep Maharaga's legs, but Maharaga would simply jump over it, slamming his fist down again. Hikari would roll out of the way, but just then he would see Kashimo sprinting straight towards both of them. Maharaga would swing once again at Hikari, but he would swing around Maharaga, dodging the attack. as Kashimo would swing down, attempting to hit Hikari. However, his attack would land on Maharaga, as Maharaga would turn his head, twisting towards Kashimo. The wheel on his head would begin to spin once more. Just then, Kashimo would begin to smile. He would realize that he had enough electricity stored up. He would shoot it out, making it head straight towards Maharaga, sending it directly towards his head, hoping it would blow the creature to smithereens. It would connect, and Maharaga's head would be blown straight off his body. Kashimo would laugh and say that he didn't think the Shikigami would be so weak. However, the wheel above Maharaga's head again would spin, as his head would reform and Maharaga would begin to smile. Kashimo would say of course, as Kashimo would then say of course, there's no way that something that was summoned by that guy would be that weak. Just then, Hikari's domain expansion would line up 3 numbers as he would hit a jackpot, dismissing the domain, and Hikari would have almost endless cursed energy. Yuji would sit there, realizing that although Hikari had a great curse technique, his domain was the only thing that was worthwhile. It gave him an immense amount of cursed energy, allowing him to be effectively immortal. Yuji would grit his teeth, realizing Hikari's curse technique was completely useless to him. He would then begin to focus on Kashimo. Maharaga would swing yet again towards Kashimo, as Kashimo would duck underneath it, using his staff to smack Maharaga in the chin. Maharaga would immediately gather himself, looking straight back down at Kashimo, as Kashimo would begin to smile once more, saying that he can't believe this thing was so durable. As Hikari would then rush in, Hikari would smack Maharaga out of the way, telling Kashimo that they need to work together. However, Kashimo would laugh and tell Hikari that he's a loser, and that only losers think about working together. He's going to kill this thing and Hikari, and then immediately go after Yuji. Yuji would notice something as well about Kashimo. Kashimo wasn't using an innate technique, not yet at least. It was the trait of his cursed energy that was allowing him to do the things he was doing so far, generating electricity. If Yuji took his technique, would he be able to use the trait of the cursed energy? This was the question he was asking himself. He could also feel it off of Hikari as well. Hikari's cursed energy was rough. However, he wasn't sure, even if he were to take either of their techniques, was the cursed energy trait from both of them going to rub off on him? If so, Kashimo's cursed technique would be the better one, seeing as it causes more destructive capabilities other than Hikari's. If anything, he could imbue one of his Shikigami with his curse technique, allowing them to be able to use the electricity and not himself. Yuji would simply begin to smile, as he would clap his hands, and Maharaga would be desummoned. Kashimo would be confused and scream at Yuji, telling him what was the deal and that he was having fun. Yuji would say that he thinks he knows what he wants to do. He would look at both of them and tell them to come at him with all they've got. He doesn't want a one-on-one, he wants a 2v1. He wants both of them to come at him, holding nothing back at all. Kashimo would begin to smile. He had already generated enough electricity, so he would tell Yuji sure thing, as he would throw his staff directly towards Yuji. Yuji would simply grab the tool, telling Kashimo that this was such a mundane way to start a fight. However, Kashimo would then send electricity out of his body, going straight towards the rod. Yuji would realize, however, it would simply be too late. As the electricity would reach the rod, it would then attach onto Yuji, blowing his arm off completely. Yuji would smile, as he had just been outplayed for a single second. Hikari would then believe that maybe, just maybe, him and Kashimo might be able to kill Yuji here, as Yuji would immediately use reverse curse technique, regenerating his hand almost instantly. As Kashimo and Hikari would be surprised at the speed of his reverse curse technique. Yuji would cock back his fist, using Star Rage, as Kashimo, already heading in, would prepare to block the attack. Yuji would charge his fist forward, sending the punch directly towards Kashimo. Kashimo would block the attack, however, the weight behind the attack was insane. Kashimo blocking would realize this, as the arm he had blocked with would break. As Yuji wasn't done with him yet, he would use his reverse gravity technique on Kashimo, slamming him into the ground, as he would then look over to Hikari and tell him that he's welcome to join. Hikari would attempt to rush at Yuji and punch him, however, Yuji would simply dodge out of the way. He would then use blood manipulation, using convergence, creating a small blood orb in his hand, compressing it. He would then use piercing blood on Hikari, only needing it to nick his skin. As long as it created an open wound, he didn't care. Hikari would attempt to smack the attack out of the way. However, it would skid off his skin, creating a small cut. That cut alone was enough. Hikari could feel it, the poison from blood manipulation coursing throughout his body. In just a few moves alone, he had immobilized both fighters. Yuji would then have a bored look on his face and say that he can't believe that was really all that they had. Hikari would then understand exactly why Yuta didn't want them to engage at all. The gap in strength between him and Yuji was absolutely immense. Yuji would walk over to Kashimo as he would place his hand on Kashimo's forehead, telling him to not scar him too much and he simply wants to try something out with his technique. He would use his innate technique on Kashimo. Taking his technique, he would then begin to flare off his cursed energy. And to Yuji's surprise, his cursed energy trait would have changed due to absorbing Kashimo's cursed technique. He would begin to smile and say that this was absolutely amazing. He knew he would find a gem among these pebbles, and Kashimo was the one to deliver it to him. Hikari would sit there weakened and not knowing what to do. Yuji would be about to walk over to him, but just then, Hikari would immediately pop his domain expansion. He needed to get the poison out of his system, and if he were to hit a jackpot here, he would simply try to escape and not fight Yuji. However, inside of the domain, Yuji would tell Hikari that he doesn't really care for him. He wanted to find Kashimo so that he could extract a strong player's technique, but Hikari wasn't worth his time, not even in the slightest. Hikari had a decent technique, however it wasn't suitable for Yuji. And Yuji would tell Hikari that he could easily kill him and take his points. However, there are other stronger players he wants to fight first and take their techniques, so he's letting him off the hook. He would then tell Hikari that he should probably get that poison out of his system though, because eventually he'll rot from the inside out. Yuji would begin to walk away, waving at Hikari, telling him to try not to die, because he still wants to fight him at least once. Yuji, using Star Rage, would simply burst through the walls of Hikari's domain, with Hikari being even more shocked. The walls from inside the domain were absolutely fortified, so the fact that Yuji was able to use a technique and burst through the inside of the walls was insane to him. He could understand if it was from the outside. However, from the inside just shows the gap in strength between him and Yuji once more. Hikari would simply laugh and say that he has his work cut out for him. And I think that's where I'm going to end it here. I really hope you guys still enjoy what I'm doing with this one. And yeah, thank you for listening. Tomorrow, Sunday or Monday, I will be doing the last part of the Garo series and part 2 of Aizen, because I see a lot of people asking for the part 2 of What If Aizen, but I'm very busy, so yeah, I do apologize. But yeah, I'll try to get that out as soon as I can. But yeah, thank you guys for listening, and yeah, peace.